30 years of innocence and peace in Belgium were shattered in the early 1980s. Citizens with no expectations of violence were murdered while shopping. No one knew who, no one knew why. Some suspected that right-wing elements in the secret services had penetrated left-wing groups and had even killed their own police to deflect attention from themselves. The suspicion was never proven, but nor did it ever go away.
In one instance, these fascists may be working in alignment with these Gladio, with Operation Gladio, or in the next instant, they're lashing out and bombing and making a statement to the people they were just aligned with. But in either situation, whatever type of domestic terrorist activity they foment, whatever type of false flag activity they foment, whether it's set up to be perceived as being a threat against the state, or it really was an attack on the state, either way, it's done by far-right reactionary elements, but blamed on leftists, blamed on Soviets, kept people in fear of some outside invasion on the way. Meanwhile, there is no Soviet threat coming for Italians, man. Hey fam, welcome to Punks for Progress. I'm Reverend Aaron. In this video, we are going to be taking a very deep dive into the covert and secret world of Gladio, which was a massive international, mostly based in Europe, but very heavily involved with the OSS, which is the precursor to the CIA. So it's a massive international effort to stamp out any type of anti-capitalist formations, organizations, or groups, primarily in Europe. Gladio was definitely primarily focused on Europe, directly following the close of World War II. So instantly, Europe goes into this hardcore anti-communist fervor, and it justifies the formation of this covert, truly murderous terrorist organization on the premise that something needs to be done to protect us in case the Soviets or the communists decide to invade Europe. Now, other than that being the pretense of it, what it really takes on is the life of everything from creating fake leftist organizations to commit murderous terrorist acts to demonize the left, to infiltrating already pre-established communist, leftist, anarchist organizations for the purposes of subverting it and demonizing leftism and communism, and all in the defense of the capitalist, imperialist, Western capitalist imperialist status quo. And what I have lined up is I have it's a 3-part series that's all about the Gladio movement and operations, or Operation Gladio. The documentary series came out in the 80s. So it's dated and it's a little grainy. I've done some stuff to kind of clean it up a little bit, and added a little bit of additions in terms of subtitles and stuff like that, where it got a little blurry and maybe you couldn't read them so well in the original form. And I should say at this point, much thanks to the YouTube channel Redabrek. Please go give them a sub. The information and the uploads that they kind of sporadically provide, I find crucial personally in my research on revolutionary socialist history and stuff. But anyway, they posted this in one video in its raw form, which had all the original time signature, running timestamp through it and stuff. And so I kind of cropped it a little and cleaned it up and broke it up into its 3 parts. And so what I'd like to do now really is just kind of go through a little bit of the highlights of each of these 3 episodes. And I think what this video will do, it can serve 2 purposes. One, it can be, I hope, an excellent standalone video as an introduction to the activities of Operation Gladio. But it's also, I think, will serve as a good accompaniment to the 3-part documentary series. So that's what I'm going to try and provide for you here. And so with no further whatever, let's go over. I have some stuff queued up from the first episode. I have, I don't know, 2 or, let's see, what do I have? I have 3 different clips of video, I believe, that we're going to take a close look at, highlight, and comment on as we go from the first episode, and we'll do that through each of the 3 episodes. And so this is from the first, which is actually called The Ringmasters. And so here we go.
For 40 years, secret terrorist organizations, many trained by Western intelligence agencies, have manipulated the political control of European sovereign states by a campaign of terror and murder. Originally part of a secret network, these groups changed from being defenders of state security into attackers of the established political order. Until 2 years ago, that secret network was generally known by the single word, Gladio. On November the 9th, 1990, the Prime Minister of Italy, Giulio Andreotti, revealed to his own parliament and the world the existence of a top-secret European-wide network of secret agents. It was called Gladio. This network of stay-behind groups was intended to fight a Soviet invasion of Western Europe. Andreotti's announcement led to an immediate reaction in the capitals of Europe. The suspicion was that some parts of the Gladio structures were involved in internal subversion.
Nous avons été saisis de la question du stay behind belge, qu'on a appelé la question Gladio, par le scandale qui a été déclenché en Italie par la révélation de l'existence en Italie d'un réseau stay behind. Et notre ministre de la Défense nationale a été interpellé par son collègue italien qui voulait savoir quelles avaient été les décisions prises lors de la dernière réunion des stay behind européens.
C'était un soir de novembre 1990 quand un délégué des autorités italiennes est venu me demander si je savais ce qu'était Gladio. À vrai dire, je n'en savais rien, sauf que ce jour-là, dans un journal italien, sur le trajet entre le Caire et Bruxelles, je venais de voir qu'il y avait un scandale en Italie, appelé Gladio.
Le ministre a fait savoir que cette chose étonnante, qu'il n'était pas au courant de l'existence au sein de l'armée et au sein de la sûreté de l'État d'un réseau stay behind.
Gladio è stata sempre protetta. L'esempio più illustre, quando Moro fu chiamato, che poi era Moro, che fu chiamato a testimoniare il processo di Catanzaro, e gli domandarono se lui aveva conoscenza di una struttura segreta, parallela, dentro i servizi, e Moro domandò ai servizi che tipo di risposta doveva dare, i servizi gli dissero che non esisteva niente, e Moro disse: sono informato che non esiste niente.
Une partie des autorités suisses a toujours su que cette structure existait. Il y avait des parlementaires qui étaient dans un conseil secret qui faisait de sorte de contrôle, mais un contrôle qui ne pouvait pas être effectif parce que nous avons trouvé que ces parlementaires ne savaient pratiquement rien.
Queste strutture parallele hanno impiegato elementi dell'estrema destra per un motivo molto semplice. È una battaglia anticomunista. Nel 1945 è finita la seconda guerra mondiale ed è iniziata la terza guerra mondiale.
The autumn of 1944. Benito Mussolini would be dead in 6 months. Adolf Hitler in less than a year.
L'idea della Repubblica Sociale Italiana è il simbolo della nostra fede assoluta.
As the Allied armies advanced on the capitals of Axis-occupied Europe, the other war, the secret war of agents and partisan groups that had always been part of the bigger war, was to reach its own climax.
Alla mattina, appena alzata, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 alla mattina, appena alzata, di risaia mi tocca andare, e fra gli insetti e le zanzare, bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 e fra gli insetti e le zanzare un duro lavoro mi tocca fare.
As the Germans withdrew, they left secret agents in the countries they had occupied. The secret services call such groups stay-behinds. For the retreating Germans, they were the staunchest believers. They were selected from the SS and the fascist Black Legions. They were to become the foot soldiers of the next war about to begin, the Cold War.
Yeah, so there you go, fam. Okay, so it gives you a brief kind of overview, introduction of what they really were. It's an international organization. It starts in Italy, but it branches out instantly. Belgium, France, England, all over Europe. And it's instantly inhabited by ex-members of the fucking Nazi Party. So you can say that, you know, fascism was defeated officially in World War II, and Mussolini is dead, and Hitler is dead. But the covert mechanisms of Western power begin instantly putting into place the foundations of an incredibly elaborate network of anti-socialist, counter-revolutionary, reactional criminal enterprises. It's astounding to me. And, you know, I've mentioned the OSS and U.S. role, and in the next clip is when they really kind of get more into, it really is the introduction into the role of the OSS, which is the Office of Strategic Services, which eventually became the CIA. But here it is. In its earliest inceptions of the OSS, it has involvement with this Gladio operation in Europe. It's taking its notes and learning things that it's going to then take home. And as we'll see, and we'll touch on later in the video and in the series, it learns the things that we will see echoed later in the COINTEL operations, in trying to stamp out leftist organizing under the Black Panthers. And it's equally as treacherous and murderous as and criminal as the Gladio operations that sort of U.S. Secret Services cut their teeth on directly after the close of World War II. So with all that said, let's go ahead and get into it. And this is their introduction basically to the OSS and its role in Gladio.
I came in and sent by General Donovan and got in touch with the heads of the Committee of National, the military junta of the Committee of National, which is the joint partisan groups. Andy Birding was the first X2 guy who came into Rome. And he'd been an old AP correspondent, and I thought I could trust him, that he was a good guy. And so we turned over to him everything we had on the German stay-behinds. Then Jim Angleton appeared in August. He began recruiting fascists because he figured that the best way to control the communists was to hire fascists. One of the most tough ones was Prince Valerio Borghese, who ran what was known as the 10th Flotilla. These are the guys that would execute partisans and hang them from lampposts all over Italy.
Oh, bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 mamma mia. Oh, che tormento, io ti invoco ogni domani.
Angleton made a deal with Borghese and then rushed up to save this commander from the partisans who would have lynched him any time, because he had lynched thousands of partisans.
Il principe Junio Valerio Borghese. Quindi era un uomo di un personaggio che ci porta diritti nel cuore dei servizi segreti americani. Lui venne salvato da Angleton, venne protetto da Angleton nel 1945, quando si è arreso a Milano alla fine della seconda guerra mondiale qui in Italia. La 10ª MAS, quindi Valerio Borghese, 10ª MAS alla formazione che lui comandava, sottoscrisse l'impegno scritto di prendere le armi con gli alleati nel caso di conflitto con l'Unione Sovietica.
So there you have the first thing that the OSS does when they begin to work with this Gladio mechanism in Europe is to align themselves with a mass murdering war criminal who was best known throughout Europe for murdering en masse anti-fascists, what they called partisans. So the US that had just supposedly fought a war against fascism, well, I mean, it did, but then it begins and it puts all its covert efforts into working with some of the greatest fascist criminals that prior to the end of closing of World War II, we were supposedly aligned against. It's maddening almost. Seems like a sort of complete reversal, but really when you take into consideration the actual anti-capitalist understanding of what went down in World War II was sure Western powers aligned against Hitler and then ultimately Mussolini. But in the end, those people would not have come to power had not the capitalist imperialist status quo been in crisis. They rose up to defend it. Once they had served their role, they were pushed aside brutally and viciously. But the continuation of the defense of the capitalist imperialist status quo had to be maintained at the expense of the full demonization of any type of anti-capitalist leftist organizing. It calls into question what our traditional understandings of fascism are supposed to be and America's roles in fascism historically. It's a lie. Yes, I think that the capitalist ruling class felt like folks like Hitler went a little too far, and maybe Mussolini. I mean, Franco lived to a ripe old age and had a massive temple built to him upon his death. I mean, that sits there to this day. It's massive. But they instantly align themselves with some of the most brutally vicious fascists. The Office of Strategic Services, the secret covert services of the United States. Sure, to get rid of Hitler, but everything that Hitler was there to defend had to still be defended, right? So it begins in Italy, but in no time it begins to spread really kind of all throughout Europe. And that's kind of what I wanted to cover in this next little clip. It's a short clip, and it really talks a little more about the stay behind networks and again, the way that they sort of begin to spread through Europe.
In Western Europe, in specific response to the communist takeover in Czechoslovakia in 1948 and the Berlin blockade, directives were issued to establish Europe-wide stay-behind organizations along the lines which existed in the final years of World War II in Western Europe.
There was an amendment to the NATO protocol, and that amendment was absolutely necessary. You didn't get in the door unless you signed. And what was in that amendment was the agreement of the government not to prosecute right-wing activists, right-wing activities, anti-communist activists in their own countries.
It's not unlikely that some right-wing groups were recruited and made to be stay-behinds because they would indeed have tipped us off if a war were going to begin. So using right-wingers, if you use them not politically but for intelligence purposes, is okay.
I disagree with that completely. It is not okay. It is never okay. I mean, we know this clearly. Fuck that piece of shit. And throughout the series, I should state, there's one of the things I find so impressive about this 3-part series is the amount of reactionaries and fascists and outright fascists that go on record. This is not something that they felt they needed to be secret about. I mean, they're coming out and saying, yes, this is what we did. This is how it worked. Now, at the time, yes, it was secret, but there's this weird, almost kind of a double think going on. You'll see later, I'll highlight it later in the series and in the episode about how they talk about they infiltrated these terrorist organizations, communist terrorist organizations. And they're using this, CIA officials using this language in this series. But at the time that they were infiltrated, they had engaged in no terrorism. Not until they're infiltrated by members of this Gladio project and these fascists and stuff do they go out and then commit terrorist acts. And again, it's not the socialists, it's the infiltrators that commit it. But they still look back on it and go, we infiltrated terrorist organizations. It's a weird disconnect from the actual reality of their behaviors. You know, again, all the while, all through this, they're selling it and they're justifying all this activity on. We have to be prepared in case there's some type of massive invasion from the Soviets. And as we'll see in the next when we really dive into the second part in this series, that it had nothing to do with that. It was really about maintaining local populations. Right? Maintaining the growth and subverting the growth of leftist or communist or anti-capitalist organizations in Italy or in Belgium, right? And so in this next clip that I want to cue up, I think it really illustrates, once again, the nature of what their motivations were and the level of disgusting pieces of shit that they're really willing to work with to maintain this. Because again, aligning yourself with fascists to do what? Oh, to hold back communism. Well, other than the fear-mongering of they might invade, what threat do communists really pose? That we have to align with mass-murdering fascist war criminals to subvert it. Well, it's because it's all about making sure that people don't find out that there's a capitalist ruling class that literally maintains and lauds power and brutally oppresses the masses of humanity. It's a small handful of people in comparison to the broader population. And whether they're going to use covert means aligned with liberal democracies or brutal means aligned with murderous criminal fascists. It's all the same because it's all in the end a defense of that capitalist imperialist, that Western capitalist imperialist status quo.
En septembre 45, je suis rappelé par mon chef, donc, et à ce moment-là, il m'envoie chez le ministre de l'Intérieur belge, M. Albert de Bleskauer, et Albert de Bleskauer, donc, me dit, j'ai besoin de vous, et il me dit, il faudrait aller voir mon collègue italien, Mario Scelba. Et je suis parti à Rome, et Mario Scelba m'a expliqué ce que je ne savais pas du tout. Nous avons constitué un réseau, c'était bien le Gladio, et il a fait des exercices d'alerte pour moi, un peu dans toute l'Italie, pour montrer qu'en 6 minutes, il pouvait être partout avec des forces d'intervention. Le problème italien n'est à comparer à aucun autre, parce que pour eux, le danger principal, numéro 1, c'était pas l'armée soviétique, c'était le danger intérieur du communisme italien qui avait, je crois, 40% des voix aux élections précédentes. Et c'était ça que Scelba avait peur. Et c'est pour ça que lui avait des dépôts d'armes et des équipes d'intervention.
There were people inside the American government, George Kennan most notably, who were arguing that the chance of the Communist Party winning the 1948 elections was so great that the United States should use military force to stop the elections, not hold the elections at all, just cancel the elections, send the army in, and say to the communists, we're not going to risk elections because there's a chance of you winning. Well, this was laughed out of school by the President and the Secretary of State and all other responsible government officials. I mean, none of that was ever put into effect. And the United States said, okay, well, we'll run the elections, and we'll compete in the elections.
General Marshall and James Forrestal and Allen Dulles all realized that in 1948 it was an absolutely critical moment, and that the United States didn't have, they had an intelligence service which was quite new and young. It could collect intelligence, it could have counterintelligence, it could do everything, but it could not carry out a covert operation. There was no charter for it. And so that was remedied quite rapidly in 1947-48.
Gladio fu costituita nel 1948 e credo era operativa già alla fine dell'anno. Era stata composta con una grossa metodicità di scelta di persone, che molte persone provenivano dalle file dei legionari della guerra di Spagna e molte venivano anche dalle file della Repubblica fascista di Salò, gente che sapeva maneggiare molto bene le armi.
So there you go, fam. I mean, they instantly align with just, again, there's another example of they align with a bunch of, Franco sycophants. People who, in the Spanish Civil War, murdered en masse anarchists and communists who rose up for freedom. They instantly align with acolytes of Franco. It's astounding to me. It really is astounding to me. I mean, I should know it's true, but it is the worst type of people that they've chosen to align with. People who murdered partisans throughout Europe in World War II. People who aligned with Franco to murder communists and innocent communists and anarchists in Spain during the Civil War. These are the people that they start gathering up to form this new project. This is what the OSS cut its teeth on, and from this it spreads. It's in Belgium, it's in France, it's in Spain, it's in Italy, it's in Great Britain, right? And in the second episode, which we're going to start covering next, is where we really start to see that first, that, you know, its first goal is to sort of begin recruiting and figuring out where its alliances are going to be and sort of establishing the talking points of what their project is, which is, of course, the line that they sold it on has been that, again, we have to do all these covert operations and we have to work with these fascists who are deeply anti-communist, so that makes them good comrades somehow, to to protect ourselves against some type of invasion from Soviets or communists. They provide really no examples of, communists or Soviets wanting to do this. Keep in mind that right at the end of the close of the Cold War, Russia was devastated, just like every other country in Europe. Its economy was very shaky, and it had exhausted all of its efforts and resources into the war effort, into killing Hitler and defeating the Nazis, with a little help from America. But really, the battles at Stalingrad and these battles between, Russia is who really tipped the scales of the war and were most instrumental in defeating the Nazis. Supposedly in congruence and as an ally to the Western powers, who the instant of the close of the World War II, begin these massive efforts against any type of leftist organizing domestically and demonizing against any type of Soviet or communist powers abroad, right, or internationally or extranationally, right? And again, what Russia needed to do, just like every other country in Europe, was rebuild, was really kind of, lick its wounds and reestablish its economy and pick up the pieces in the remnants of World War II and rebuild its nation. It was not setting about the purpose of invading the West, let alone the United fucking States. It was a lie. And then when you see now, as we get into the next episode in the series, how clearly it's a lie, because really it begins all of its efforts into making up lies about local communist organizings. Local, respective to each different country, separate country, right? Local Italians, local French, local Belgians, that kind of stuff. And infiltrating them. And then before they really begin the process of infiltrating, as we'll see in this next section, they just go out and these Gladio operatives go out and commit mass bombings and murders and shit, and then just go, oh, well, it was leftists that did it. See, this is why we have to make sure the communists are coming. See, look, they bombed someone in this country, or they bombed someone in that country, when in fact it comes out years later that it's operatives from this fucking Gladio op. But damage done. It's already in the psyche of Western European population in America, and say, oh my gosh, communists from Soviets did bombings in Spain and Belgium? Oh, wow. Man, it's brilliant. It's really brilliant in how effectively diabolical it really is. So, yeah, let's go over here, and I'm going to, what I have queued up now is sort of an opening segment piece from episode 2, what I would call the false flag episode, but you'll see they have a different title for it. But it really shows, it really gets into a lot of in-depth about the whole nature and sort of genesis of the employment of false flag operations. Intense. All right, so check it out.
In 1980, a bomb exploded at Bologna railway station, which killed 86 people. 6 years later, an official report revealed the existence of an invisible government in Italy, run by the state secret services and groups of political terrorists. It also identified a secret military and civilian organization under which neo-fascist groups were allowed to commit atrocities against civilians for political motives.
Inizialmente nel mandato che il Parlamento ci aveva dato, noi dovevamo occuparci delle stragi irrisolte in Italia. A cominciare dalla prima grossa piazza Fontana, giù scendendo gli attentati ai treni, Brescia, poi si arriva alla strage della stazione di Bologna, stragi dico minori come numero di morti, tipo quella di Peteano.
Peteano è stato un atto di guerra, motivato da una ragione molto semplice. I corpi di polizia, i servizi di sicurezza e le forze politiche che usufruiscono dei servizi e di queste forze di polizia hanno strumentalizzato il neofascismo italiano. Lo hanno strumentalizzato fin dai primordi, fin dal 1945-46. Peteano nasce come un atto di rivolta, come un segnale di rivolta contro questa strumentalizzazione, colpendo l'arma più rappresentativa dello Stato.
On May the 31st, 1972, the Carabinieri in Petiano received a phone call.
Senta, vorrei dirle che Gladio una macchina che ha due buchi sul parabrezza, no? Fra la strada del Poggio Terformata a Savogna.
3 policemen were lured to a car primed to explode. All 3 were to die.
Da destra non si poteva e non si doveva attaccare lo Stato e chi lo Stato rappresentava. Bisognava attaccare i civili, quello che è il popolo, le donne, i bambini, le persone innocenti, strane ad ogni gioco politico, per una ragione semplice, perché bisognava obbligare questa gente, l'opinione pubblica italiana, a rivolgersi allo Stato, a rivolgersi al regime per chiedere maggiore sicurezza. Il ruolo della destra d'Italia è stato proprio questo. Si è messa al servizio di apparati di Stato che hanno alimentato una strategia che giustamente è stata definita della tensione, in quanto bisognava portare la gente ad accettare in qualsiasi momento, nell'arco di un trentennio, dal 1960 al 1985-86, la possibilità di uno stato d'emergenza. Quindi la gente avrebbe barattato molto volentieri parte della sua libertà con una sicurezza, con la sicurezza di poter camminare sulle strade, viaggiare sui treni, salire sugli aerei, entrare in banca. Questa è la logica politica che sta dietro tutte le stragi, che rimangono impunite proprio perché lo Stato non può condannare se stesso o proclamare se stesso colpevole di quello che ha fatto.
I mean, wow, fam, because what did he say? That is the role of the bombings, is to make sure that people are terrified of a Soviet threat, to maintain from the 60s up until the mid-80s, he said. What was it, Operation Tension or something he called it? But a heightened sense of tension, a heightened sense of fear and terror of some threat. But really, the whole time, the ones that are telling you to be afraid and that you need to be terrified are the ones creating the conditions that you're supposed to be terrified of. There's no Soviets doing bombings and mass shootings and things like that and terrorist activities throughout Europe. It's the fucking central intelligence bodies of those independent states inflicting criminal, violent fucking terror on its own people so that they will give up any semblance of freedom in order for the state to step in and be that big brother mechanism. That's fascism. Even if it disguises itself as some sort of liberal democracy, that's fascism, fam. That's massive manipulation of the masses. I know I keep stumbling a lot, and it's disgusting. It's like I can't find these words to really describe it because it's such a massive manipulation and fear. Like this is causing trauma to like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, to live in a perpetual state of fear of some type of outside threat to the point where you'd be willing to give up your own personal freedoms so that this state can do whatever it can to protect you from it. That is a very perpetually traumatic state to live in. Not to mention that they're actually bombing things and killing people, like literally murdering people, so that they can go be afraid, be very, very afraid. And in more of my notes here, they create terrorists to bolster state power. These terrorists strike out at the powers that created them, and you'll see in that situation, in some of it, some of the fascists and the people that they recruited into this Gladio project maybe weren't happy with the way things were going and then sort of lashed back at the powers that created them and did bombings. But even so, what they ultimately did is they went into full effect to cover up the fact that these fascists had kind of lashed out against them so that they could use it to demonize the left. And they allowed the people who, this time, while at one, in one instance, these fascists may be working in alignment with these Gladio, with Operation Gladio, or in the next instant, they're lashing out and bombing and making a statement to the people they were just aligned with. But in either situation, whatever type of domestic terrorist activity they foment, whatever type of false flag activity they foment, whether it's set up to be perceived as being a threat against the state, or it really was an attack on the state, either way, it's done by far-right reactionary elements, but blamed on leftists, blamed on Soviets, kept people in fear of some outside of invasion on the way. Meanwhile, there is no Soviet threat coming for Italians, man. The war is over, and the Bolsheviks and the people and the Soviet, well, not the Bolsheviks, but the Soviets, the war is over, and the Soviets are trying to rebuild their nation in the wake of World War II. They're not plotting invasions of other countries. There were some skirmishes and there were some co-options that went on with the Soviets and different nations that had previously been a part, aligned with them, and that's a totally separate issue. But that's totally different than saying, thinking that any Soviet army was going to invade France or invade any other country. It just was not on the agenda, and there's no evidence to assert that there was. But it didn't change that that's what was used to keep people in fear. And they had to continue. They had to keep doing these bombings and stuff to keep people afraid. So it's not just living in fear, it's being re-traumatized. New bombings, new murders, and not just fake bombings, actually bombing train stations and cafes and stuff like that, where people get slaughtered. Bloody, fucking horrible acts, man. I'm floored. Right, so I have another section, another segment picked out to kind of go through from this episode in the series. And what it really gets to is what really motivates the OSS and then later the CIA. What is the foundational organizing principles that the CIA was built on? And that's what this next segment really gets into.
Nel senso che io, appena preso il comando della sezione, avevo notato che i finanziamenti americani, perché erano tenuti dagli accordi bilaterali a finanziare l'operazione, ma soprattutto il loro invio di mezzi e materiali bellici, aveva subito un tempo d'arresto. E non avevo capito il perché, non capivo il perché e non mi davo delle spiegazioni. Allora provocai questo incontro per sapere i motivi della cessazione di questi aiuti, di questo rifornimento. E quindi dopo mesi di lavorio tra il diplomatico e il militare riuscii finalmente a a invitare in Sardegna al centro di addestramento Mr. Stone e Mr. Sednawi, proprio per porre la domanda: guardate, questo è il nostro centro di addestramento, eccetera, voi potete assistere a quello che siamo capaci di fare, perché non vi siete fatti più vivi. Se questa è una posizione del governo americano ne prendiamo atto, ma voi però una risposta ce la dovete dare. E realizzai che gli interessi della CIA, rappresentati appunto da questi due funzionari, non erano molto centrati sul grado di efficienza di addestramento che noi avevamo raggiunto, ma riproposero la questione del controllo interno, cioè delle predisposizioni da adottare contro moti di piazza, scioperi di grande estensione, di scala nazionale si intende, e soprattutto eventuale crescita del Partito Comunista.
You see, fam? All the CIA cared about was not about an invasion from some outside threat. It's how do you counter local organizing? How do you make sure a worker strike doesn't happen? This is what the CIA or the OSS was over there trying to ascertain, while aligning itself with brutal war criminals and mass murderers and fascists, was so that they could come home and break strikes here in the United States, so that they could infiltrate leftist groups organizing and learn how it's done to properly shut them down. Here, let's go back just a little bit more. I want to go back to this because it really, they're going to get now more into specifically the timeline, which I think is relevant to what I'm talking about in terms of the CIA then coming back to use what they learned from the Gladio, from Project Gladio, for use here at home.
Quando Gladio comincia, perché poi 56 soprattutto negli anni 60 è stato abbastanza attivo, gli americani più volte nei briefing, nei meeting che facevano, sostenevano il fatto che bisognasse anche adoperare la struttura contro insorgenza. Però questa storia finì abbastanza presto, perché nel 1966 la CIA cominciò a capire che non era più il caso di insistere su queste strutture e praticamente allentò la sua pressione non solo in Italia ma anche in Germania e anche in Belgio.
E Mr. Stone disse chiaramente che gli aiuti, i finanziamenti e il supporto della CIA erano condizionati dalla nostra intenzione di mettere in atto, di programmare e di pianificare queste misure di contrasto all'interno.
So, yeah, they begin to ease off because they don't give a shit about what's going on in Italy or Belgium or France. The CIA wants to know how to fucking shut down motherfuckers at home. In 1966, it begins to back off its affiliations with Project Gladio. What's going on in 66, 67? Well, there's the rise of the Panthers at home. That's one of the things that's going on. We have a massive anti-war effort growing here in the United States. This is when COINTELPRO goes into effect.
Just at the moment that the Panthers are turning towards survival programs, towards free breakfast programs, free clinics, and free food programs that will help them reconnect with the Black community and build their membership, and repudiating this earlier advocacy of armed self-defense and police patrols, J. Edgar Hoover attacks the Panthers.
Hoover saw any form of Black organizing as a threat to the status quo as he saw it. Change that would have involved equality, that would have put power in Black people's hands, was very much a threat to Hoover. He started something called COINTELPRO, directed against what he called Black nationalist hate groups.
COINTELPRO was the abbreviation of Counterintelligence Program.
The purpose of this new counterintelligence endeavor is to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize the activities of black nationalists.
Neutralize could mean making somebody an informant, or putting somebody in jail, or having somebody killed. Hoover was sending letters to various offices almost on a weekly basis to come up with new ideas to go after members of the Black Panther Party.
"245 of the 290 COINTELPRO actions were against the Black Panthers. One of the mandates was, do not make this program public. Do not tell anybody that it exists.
FBI has a memo that states the objectives of counterintelligence operations. One is to prevent the rise of what they call the Black Messiah, a single charismatic leader that could unify the movement. They want to prevent the appeal of radical political movement to black youth.
And they wanted to isolate these groups to prevent them from gaining respectability in the black community.
And they were very explicit in stating these goals.
We were followed every day. We were harassed. Our phones were tapped. Our families were harassed. My parents were both visited by the FBI.
We must create suspicion with respect to their respective spouses, and your imagination and resourcefulness must be employed in order for the Bureau to be successful.
They would send letters to my wife, and the letters would say that Landon is sleeping with this woman, or sleeping with that woman, or sleeping with the other woman.
Slave patrol, slave patrol.
This is when COINTELPRO goes into effect. On the heels of the OSS being in Europe, participating in Operation Gladio. It wasn't like J. Edgar Hoover was just born with the knowledge of how to construct the COINTEL operation that it employed to subvert and murder and Black Panthers and destroy their ability to organize. And I think that what I have queued up for the next segment really gets more to, of course, Operation Gladio did not just cease operation because CIA became less involved. And that's not to say that the CIA just halted all affiliation with it. It's just they weren't bringing as much of their funding and their money and their resources to it, right? So in this next segment, like I said, this gets back to the continued operations of Project Gladio in Europe. And so now that they've really sort of built an infrastructure, now that they've done some terrorism and successfully attached it to some imaginary amorphous communist threat out there to keep the people scared, they need to continue it with sort of new levels of nefariousness, I guess. It becomes much more complex. It becomes not just go out and do a bombing. It's let's actually infiltrate real leftist organizations, then do terrorist acts so that people will go, oh, wow, this local leftist organization is actually this unhinged, anti-democratic, anti-freedom, murderous, terrorist organization. And not only that, they begin to create, which we will see really much more in the third section of the series, we'll cover it, but they begin to actually create fake leftist organizations, ultra leftists, to be to sort of the supposed left of already pre-existing actual real true communist or anti-capitalist organizations, right? So that they can establish themselves as being, oh, we're the real left, we're ultra left, we're super left, and then they go out and commit a bunch of fucking bullshit terrorist acts that communists and socialists and anti-capitalists really have no interest in committing. But I should actually point out at this point, it's very easy for people to believe this kind of stuff because in the interim years between World War I and World War II was the sort of height or the era of the propaganda by the deed, which was when a lot of anti-capitalist revolutionary socialists went out and actually did terrorist acts. They actually did bombings. They did all of these things that this Operation Gladio goes on to do later. But there were political assassinations and all the kinds of stuff committed by anarchists and, revolutionaries, like I said, in those interim years between World War I and World War II. And because they thought if they did all this stuff, it would kick in people's fervor to join the revolution, and it would really activate, revolutionary forces, and they could ultimately have a mass revolt against capitalism. And it didn't work. In fact, it massively backfired on them. That was the formation of Interpol is created. The first international policing organization in Europe was created to subvert the activities of anarchists.
To fight this imagined international terror, a very real international police force was set up. The governments of 21 countries organized an international conference for the social defense against anarchists, which laid the foundations of what would later become Interpol.
And all of this was making national headlines, right? So it's not fresh in people's minds at the close of World War II, but it's back there and they remember it because it's only a few years prior. I remember. Anarchists, weren't they doing bombings and assassinations and stuff like that? So it's easy for people to sort of believe that this was happening. But what people should understand, and I encourage people to go look, there's a video on our channel that's called Propaganda by the Deed, and it really outlines, it's just a short video, it's like 12, 15 minutes, but it really explains that history in a quick overview, and it's a really excellent piece that I suggest people go watch. But anarchists that were engaged in Propaganda by the Deed realized, one, it did not bring the revolution that they hoped by any means. Two, not only did it not swell their numbers, it made people afraid to join their numbers. And three, it actually became the justification to put all these massive, huge policing bodies and responses to quell any type of leftist organizing, which then this becomes very useful, this history, even though revolutionary socialists have abandoned completely any semblance of Propaganda by the Deed by the end of World War II. Most people don't know that. And so I think it's very easy for people to, for this Operation Gladio mechanisms, for these operations to, hit some dog whistles, hit some familiar whistles that people recognize. They go, okay, I remember Propaganda by the Deed, so this is believable to me. So it's exploiting a past history that has been abandoned by the people they demonize. So, with no further ado, let's go ahead and jump over here into this. This is the I have this, and then one more short segment to cover in this episode 2, and then we'll move on to the closing episode. But yeah, here we go.
Sono un gruppo provinciale che si mette praticamente a servizio, come altri gruppi, come già lo era l'Ordine Nuovo, come lo era Avanguardia, come lo erano altri gruppi meno noti. Di questa strategia e la portano avanti. La strategia prevedeva infiltrazione a sinistra e questo l'hanno fatto quasi tutti, l'ha fatto Ordine Nuovo, l'ha fatto Avanguardia, l'ha fatto ovviamente il gruppo di Padova. Attentati da attribuire alla sinistra e tutti hanno fatto le stesse cose.
La prima linea era diretta a fare degli attentati per farli ricadere sulla sinistra, la seconda linea invece era di infiltrazione nei gruppi di sinistra e per indurre anche questi gruppi estremistici della sinistra extraparlamentare a fare degli attentati e quindi a inserirsi in questa strategia che mirava ad acuire l'attenzione allora sociale e politica nel paese.
So there you go, fam. Okay, so they went out, they did some bombings, seemed to be working. They're like, next step, let's infiltrate. Next step, let's create groups. To continue this elaborate international effort to scare the shit out of average people. Now, this may seem like what's the point? What's the purpose? Because the purpose is that there are a handful of people. I roughly say it's about 3 million people now. I would say at that time, probably at best about 1 million people. But that understand that they have a ruling grip over the masses that capitalism has facilitated for them. And that the only way to maintain that is to keep the masses terrified, ignorant, and subservient. I think that there's no greater example of that reality than the activities of Operation Gladio. All right, now I have one more video, or one more short clip queued up to play to close out sort of this second episode, and then we'll move on to the closing episode.
La strage di Bologna avviene in un momento in cui massimo è l'allarme del regime e l'allarme dei servizi di sicurezza italiani, alleate e nordamericane per la potenza elettorale raggiunta dal Partito Comunista Italiano. Quindi la strage di Bologna, anche questa, risponde, come tutte le altre stragi, alla logica di uno Stato che, non sapendo più come fronteggiare un nemico politico, ricorre ai mezzi estremi, ai mezzi della violenza da attribuire ora agli estremisti di sinistra, ora agli estremisti di destra, per giustificare un suo eventuale intervento. Non c'è altra verità sulla strage di Bologna.
That is the only truth about Bologna. Do you see? Communists in Italy had done really well in apparently the first post-World War II election. It's not that they were going to be invaded. It's not that there was any type of, covert, nefarious, terrorist plots being, plotted by the communists. It's that they were really popular and doing well in local parliaments. Not just in Italy, but in Europe. Socialists were very, very popular. They had just defeated Hitler. And so they had to make people give up their support. They had to cause people to turn away from their support of communism. They had to cause people to be terrified of communism. Not because it was anything to be terrified of, but because it was popular, and because the ruling class were terrified of the emancipation that it could provide for the masses of this fucking planet. This creates the world we live in now, fam. All right, let's check out this opening segment from episode 3.
30 years of innocence and peace in Belgium were shattered in the early 1980s. Citizens with no expectations of violence were murdered while shopping. No one knew who, no one knew why. Some suspected that right-wing elements in the secret services had penetrated left-wing groups and had even killed their own police to deflect attention from themselves. The suspicion was never proven, but nor did it ever go away.
Secret. There may be times when host country governments show passivity or indecision in the face of communist subversion. U.S. Army intelligence must have the means of launching special operations which will convince host country governments and public opinion of the reality of the insurgent danger. U.S. Army intelligence should seek to penetrate the insurgency by means of agents on special assignment with the task of forming special action groups among the most radical elements of the insurgency.
So there it is, fam. That's from a CIA field manual. Okay, it's an official U.S. intelligence field manual. Okay? In the series, you have some Secret Service agents and different American officials and stuff trying to act like, well, I don't know. One guy talks about, you can make any statement in any country anywhere. Trying to act like that's not part of a central mission of the Central Intelligence Agency. Except it's in the field manual. This is what it's about, fam. Now, this clip, I think, really illustrates sort of, here's the examples of what I mentioned earlier about they're not just going to do terrorism and blame it on leftists. They now want to actually infiltrate leftist organizations and then create leftist organizations. And that's really what the bulk of the third episode really gets into, a number of different examples of this. And we're not going to go through all of them, but this clip, I think, does a good example of it covers like 3 or 4 different actions, some that worked out right, some that, went the way they wanted, some that didn't quite go the way they wanted, but it really gets to the nature of the how broad the operation is and how devious and destructive and murderous it really is that they were planted there. Because that's just completely in keeping and in alignment with the stated goals of this project, this Operation Gladio. I'm sure there are plenty of fucking examples that you can find even to this day that will point to, the guns they found with those communists. Remember, they found them, they had the weapons that were used in a terrorist, blah, blah, blah. Because it's not like people see anything after the initial headline, which would have been communist organization found with weapons related to terrorist activity. Oh my gosh. Communists, wow, they're collecting guns to do terrorisms, and they did terrorisms, and they found, good thing they got the communists. These are people who are out here. I want to say this about all the communists and socialists and anarchists that I know are deeply, deeply compassionate people, deeply empathetic people. These are not people gathering up weapons to go do some terrorisms to create havoc and chaos to unstabilize nations. No communist believes that that's a way to achieve an anti-capitalist revolution, a successful revolution that does away with capitalism. It's not about getting out and subverting the cohesive elements of a society and making it crumble into chaos so that we can step in and go, we have a plan. It's not how it works, man. That's fascism. That's what fascism does. It creates chaos and fear and distrust and says, I'm the only one that can protect you and save you. When you hear about violent Antifa, when you hear about violent communist organizing, if it's not talking about the years between World War I and World War II during the era of the propaganda by the deed, it's a fucking lie. I have never seen evidence of any type of truly leftist body in any way even remotely interested in engaging in terrorist activity. And if you find a group that has the emblems and the symbols and the rhetoric of leftist socialists and they're advocating for any type of violent activity or terrorist activity, they were most likely infiltrated by reactionaries and nefarious fucking elements and moles to subvert the actual project of anti-capitalism, to fear-mongering people into supporting the capitalist imperialist status quo that literally brutalizes and oppresses us all. That is traumatizing millions of people into being afraid of something that is really the path to their emancipation, causing them in the process to trust and to seek the protection of that which would do them the worst harm. Let's get back over to this.
In cases where the infiltration of agents into the insurgent leadership has not been effectively implemented, it may help to utilize ultra-leftist organizations.
Il me paraissait très significatif que dans les années 80, s'était développé un terrorisme de type médiatique qui utilisait les médias pour provoquer un choc dans l'opinion et dans la classe politique. Alors ce terrorisme pouvait avoir deux origines, soit une terrorisme d'extrême gauche ou d'extrême droite, être le fait de gouvernements étrangers ou de services de renseignement et d'action étrangers, un terrorisme qui vise à déstabiliser la société démocratique.
Vous savez, en Belgique, il y a un certain nombre d'affaires non élucidées où une bande, vraisemblablement, a perpétré de très nombreux meurtres au milieu des années 80. Et on ne sait toujours rien de cela. Et certains ont imaginé qu'il pouvait y avoir une volonté de déstabiliser le régime démocratique dans notre pays.
It has been suggested that it was meant to destabilize the democratic institutions in their country. Suggested by who? And well, I mean, and there's truth to it. Yes, it is meant, well, not necessarily to destabilize the core institutions of their nation, but to make people afraid that the core institutions of their nations are under threat. It's to give the illusion of it. So then people go, okay, whatever you have to do, just protect it. If you have to go to extreme measures, it's okay. Hey, if I have to give up some of my freedom, it's okay because, man, those communists, they're out of control. They're bombing shit. They're murdering people. Do what you gotta do to protect us. It's been suggested to dismantle. There it is. They do these violent, murderous, terrorist acts so that they can suggest that the core cohesive elements of society are somehow under threat. And then they attach that to communism. And let me add this about that. What that does is that instills in people's minds that communists, and by extension all socialists, including anarchists, are these deeply, deeply, deeply demented people who are on a project of let's dismantle the core fabric of society to implement our plan. Let's cause mass destruction and devastation and fear and misery. I mean, to be someone that would employ that methodology, you would have to be a very sick, dementedly dark and twisted motherfucker. The thing is, as it turns out, it's not the communists that are these sick, twisted, demented, purposefully nefarious motherfuckers. It's the mechanisms of power, of Western power, that thrive and are in place to this very day. These are not governments that were overthrown by our current democracies. These are the authorities of Western Europe and the United States. What's going on today is a direct extension of these activities. Okay, in this next segment, they're going to talk a little more about the international structure of this. I mean, because it's just so massive and elaborate. I know I keep saying that, but they're going to get into a little more detail about the specifics of how elaborate and broad that Operation Gladio really was.
Paul Latinus a été découvert, alors qu'il était inconnu, lors d'une de mes interviews par hasard. Rapidement, j'ai mené une enquête. Et cette enquête m'a montré comment Paul Latinus avait été implanté dans le Front de la Jeunesse avec des missions bien particulières. D'apprendre au Front de la Jeunesse comment s'organiser dans des actions violentes. Attaque de café d'immigrés arabes, camp d'entraînement militaire, manière de se faire encadrer pour la surveillance.
Alors la structure de Western New Post, je rappelle aussi que c'est la structure identique pour tous les morceaux, pour tous les quartiers de la même tarte. C'est toujours le même principe. Vous avez un état-major au-dessus. Au-dessus de cet état-major, vous avez ces deux grandes directions qui apportent soit l'assistance économique, soit l'assistance de besoins d'autorité immédiate. Bon, ces gens-là, en haut, on ne les connaît pas. Ils ne sont connus que des personnes clés, des personnages clés. En Europe, en l'occurrence, il y avait 9 personnages clés. Un des 9 était Paul Latinus. Le Earth Anti-Communist League, eux ne peuvent pas agir dans une portion du monde, ni partout en même temps. Eux, pour faire quelque chose, ils le feront faire. Par qui? Par des compagnies amies faisant partie du même système. Vous avez l'Europe divisée en 8 avec un centre. Nous avions le groupe centre pour la Belgique, l'ouest de l'Allemagne, le nord de la France et pratiquement la majeure partie des Pays-Bas.
Latinus avait été chargé de constituer et de structurer ce groupe comme une armée secrète, un peu sur le modèle de la SS. Il y avait un service secret, un service de sécurité à l'intérieur du groupe. Chaque membre du groupe portait un double nom, un nom de code, généralement des noms allemands. Chaque membre ne connaissait pas l'autre et on recrutait dans ce groupe par parrainage. Et celui qui était recruté ne connaissait pas les autres membres de l'équipe.
On peut créer une branche action avec ceux qui sont les plus physiques. On peut créer une branche, je vais dire intellectuelle. Ce sont ceux qui vont gérer le renseignement. Donc de l'information, de l'action et de l'université. L'université, pourquoi? Parce qu'on a parfois besoin d'un scientifique, d'un laborantin pour un produit bien spécial, comme dans une brigade judiciaire, bon, il y a toujours le labo. Ce cheveu, à qui appartiendra-t-il? Bon, on n'est pas allé jusqu'aux cheveux, mais des produits chimiques, une demande, à la limite, une demande d'explosifs, ça se fait vers la branche universitaire. Quelque chose de spécial, bien entendu, on ne vous parle pas d'un bâton de TNT, des produits beaucoup plus spéciaux.
Je reprends contact avec Paul Latinus. Il me donne rendez-vous dans un restaurant de province et nous nous voyons pendant toute une nuit, au cours de laquelle il me raconte qu'il a été chargé par des autorités, il ne me dit pas lesquelles au début, de constituer depuis plusieurs années en Belgique un groupe secret de résistance pour lutter contre une certaine pénétration soviétique et contre la collaboration de certaines autorités belges avec les soviétiques.
So you see, this is your traditional fascist organizing structure. You know, you got a couple people in charge, keeping people separated and divided, not really communicating with each other. But these people at the top, they know, they're able to coordinate all the information that people go out and just go out and do their jobs without questioning. And so they create these cells, these fascist organizing cells, right? Now, keep in mind that Interpol is still in action, right? Interpol, which was originally organized, like I said, as a response to propaganda by the DE. So in Europe, you have simultaneously this Operation Gladio that is infiltrating leftist groups and doing all this terrorist activity to demonize communists and infiltrate communists and accuse communists of murder and terror. Meanwhile, you have Interpol, which is its sole purpose in which it was organized was to subvert and destroy anarchist organizing bodies, and then goes on to, you know, take on a massive life of its own that we know today. But like, I mean, it's like the amount of wealth and resources that went into and still continue to go into destroying and subverting any form of leftist organization and anti-capitalist organization is is staggering. It's staggering. It pales the amount. It's beyond my ability to really comprehend how massive it is. That's why I'm so struck by this. This whole, I didn't know about, I should say that. Probably should have said that at the beginning of this series. I literally just found out about, I had heard this term Gladio before. I'd seen mention of it in different writings and stuff, but it always just kind of went by me. I didn't understand really what it was until I stumbled on this series as uploaded by Redabreck, which you should subscribe to on YouTube. And there's so many different elements and infrastructures and things that I understand are in place today, but never really understood how they came together and the genesis of them, right? And the beginnings of them, and how do they relate to what happened right at the end. Here it is. It all comes together, I think. This is the key that unlocks the entire puzzle in many ways, I think. And because it is the congruence, it's the meeting place of Interpol, of all the of fascist organizing and fascist covert terrorist organizing, with the birth of the CIA, the OSS, is it's just cutting its teeth and establishing its working models. Wow. The foundations of what we have today begins with this. This is the way the powers that be said, okay, here's how we're going to organize the West now that we have completed this World War II thing. Here's how we're going forward. This is how we're going to structure Western society going forward. And we're going to do it based on traumatizing and catalyzing fear. We're going to do it by the most nefarious and dishonest means. I mean, dishonest in the sense that they're lying about who's at the root of the things that they should fear. The things that they should fear are real. There are those that risk tearing apart the very fabric of society. These activities of Operation Gladio, if they could instantly go one way awry and destroy an entire nation, could collapse if this isn't handled. It's walking such a razor thin line. It's so playing with fire, but they're willing to risk it to keep people terrified enough that they'll expend any bit of good sense and their own self-interests to defend literally the thing that they've been taught to be terrified of. So there's a couple little clips that I have set up now that are really going to bring this all to a close, and really, I think that this is some of the most sort of impactful clips that in the series. Of course, it's at the end. It's the climax of the series, right? But they really do a good job of climactically exemplifying the nature of this disgusting thing called fucking Operation Gladio.
They have two plans. The first one was to organize gangs to do hold up, hostage, killing. The second one was to organize a so-called left movement who will do a terrorist attempt, just to make the population believe that these terrorist attempts were done by the left.
In Belgium, as in the rest of Europe, the 1968 student revolts in Paris, Brussels, Frankfurt and Milan led to the emergence of armed leftist action groups. The Red Army faction, Baader Meinhof, Action Directe, and the Red Brigades, Le Brigate Rosse. On March the 16th, 1978, the Italian left-wing terrorists kidnapped the former Italian Prime Minister, Mr. Aldo Moro. On that day, the Italian Parliament was about to debate the inclusion of the Italian Communist Party in a government of national unity for the first time since 1948. Aldo Moro had long believed that this was the only solution for political stability in Italy.
Brigata Rosso was penetrated, Baader Meinhof was penetrated, Action Direct, various of these left-wing terrorist organizations were penetrated and co-opted.
I find it staggering. I mentioned this earlier, and here it is. This CIA spook motherfucker knows full well that they infiltrated leftist organizations for the purpose of doing terrorist acts to demonize and fearmonger against that organization. An organization that was not prior engaged in any type of terrorist activities. Yes, there were student uprisings and some of them were getting armed. That's very, very different than going out and kidnapping some government, some head of fucking state. And as we'll see, it goes on that it was that the Red Brigades were infiltrated by this project, Gladio, by operatives from Project Gladio, who then went about the task of pulling this action against this head of state, right? But it was for the purpose of making people terrified of the Red Brigades or of communist organizing. It goes on in this series, in this episode, and where members, one of the founding members of the Red Brigades is looking at it and going, how is it? Wait, we're doing what? How did this happen? Well, it was because of infiltration. But this spook calls them, he's still years later now, in retelling of this activity, and his retelling of it still calls them terrorist organizations. Like, it's weird that it's like a literal cognitive dissonance in this piece of shit spook's head. He knows they're not terrorist organizations. He knows they're not terrorist organizations until operatives from Operation Gladio infiltrated it and did terrorist activities that, but still, he can't shake it. He can't shake how deeply he's internalized the bullshit propaganda that Western powers use to traumatize and terrify us all. I just found that a very fascinating and I think very telling little quirk, little nuance, that he's still calling them terrorist organizations when he knows damn good and well they weren't terrorist until they were infiltrated. Fascinating, fascinating.
Le Brigate Rosse sono state infiltrate con notevoli difficoltà, perché erano una struttura molto chiusa e direi anche efficiente, ma tuttavia ci sono state anche delle infiltrazioni notevoli che ci hanno portato a ottimi risultati.
Federico Umberto D'Amato nasce come agente dei servizi di sicurezza della polizia, del Ministero dell'Interno, in epoca fascista, continua in epoca antifascista, forte della parentela col padre che è quest'ora, che è addetto alla commissione di depurazione dei poliziotti nel 1945-46, prosegue nella sua attività sempre a contatto con tutti i servizi segreti.
Si è fatto anche di più nel campo della sicurezza e da parte europea questa volta, soprattutto quando ci furono les événements francesi, e cioè la rivoluzione del 68. Si vide che c'era una grave minaccia di sovversione e di terrorismo in Europa. E allora io proposi la costituzione di un comitato permanente europeo, a cui aderì anche la Svizzera, che sembra neutrale, ma volle aderire anche la Svizzera, tanto è vero che questo comitato si chiamò Club di Berna.
È il fondatore del Club di Berna, perché sua è l'idea di creare il Club di Berna, che poi si riunisce ogni anno e raduna tutti i servizi segreti europei e americani. La sua prima apparizione, evidente, provata, nella battaglia politica interna, risale al 1962, alla cosiddetta operazione manifesti cinese. In sintesi, si tratta di affidare a un gruppo di estrema destra dell'avanguardia nazionale l'incarico di affiggere manifesti inneggianti a Mao, cioè è il tentativo di creare un'ultrasinistra molto più spinta del Partito Comunista. Questa operazione viene decisa a Berna, a una riunione dei servizi segreti europei, americani e cinesi.
Il club esiste tuttora e riunisce i servizi di sicurezza europei. Le aggiungerò che ogni volta che si riuniscono, siccome ne fui io il fondatore e il decano, mi mandano un saluto al padrino, che sono io.
Le Brigate Rosse sono quindi conosciute, sono ampiamente infiltrate. Tutti gli aderenti alle Brigate Rosse erano conosciuti dalle forze di polizia, dai carabinieri, dai servizi di sicurezza.
Io e altri compagni ci trasferimmo a Roma perché volevamo appunto fare un salto, noi dicevamo, politico e militare nell'iniziativa della nostra organizzazione. Dopo il sequestro di un magistrato, il nostro obiettivo era il sequestro di un uomo politico. Noi avevamo individuato appunto questa persona in Andreotti, non arrivammo nemmeno a preparare un piano reale di sequestro perché io fui arrestato, io e Renato fummo arrestati tutti. Questo infiltrato al nostro interno, così chi ha detto fratello Mitra, era ormai un anno che aveva contatti con noi, con la nostra organizzazione. Avrebbe avuto l'opportunità di infiltrarsi ancora di più all'interno dell'organizzazione nostra, perché dopo quell'appuntamento che lui aveva con Renato gli avrebbe fatto la proposta di dirigere la nostra scuola militare. Lui a questo punto avrebbe avuto l'opportunità di conoscere tutti i compagni clandestini dell'organizzazione. E la cosa che può colpire è che proprio quella volta hanno deciso di arrestare le persone.
Franceschini and Renato Curcio, the founders of the Red Brigades, were in prison when Aldo Moro was kidnapped.
Scores of reports, classified documents coming out of the Rome station which absolutely verified that, that the Red Brigades had been penetrated, that the planning staff of the Red Brigades was taking its orders from Santovita.
General Santovita was then head of SISMI, the Italian Secret Service.
There it is, fam. Not only do they want to do terrorist activity and murder people and blame leftists for it, not only want to infiltrate leftist organizations and continue that type of activity to demonize communists, they also created a whole movement of so-called ultra-leftists to sell this notion. People that would buy into, okay, so they've been demonizing these communists as being, terrorism-obsessed maniacs. And then they want to recruit people who have internalized that dishonest propaganda and say, you go be the ultra left now. People who maybe don't properly understand what communism is and don't really understand the subtleties of anti-capitalist organizing, who are fed up with, the oppression or whatever, might go, okay, yeah, let's go do this and we'll join this group, and so we can do real action. So we can go out and do kidnappings and bombings and really go after the structures of power. The lengths that they will go to and the risks that the Western imperialist powers will take to demonize us is astounding. It's staggering. It's beyond imagination. All those terms they keep reusing in this episode. We talk a lot about ultra-leftists online. Oh, you're just being ultra left because you're so extreme. You're so down with your anarchism or your communism. You go, yeah, whatever, ultra leftist. But even in that element, I think that is truly indicative of proper leftists. We understand that when people are trying to be the most extremist and the most up in your shit leftists, we with experience usually take a step back and are a little apprehensive with people like that. And there's good reason for that, apparently. There's a foundational history for that type of activity. It is our greatest enemies. It is the counter-revolutionaries. It is the reactionaries that go out and create this type of activity and then say it's leftists who did it. To the point where it'll even create people who think they're leftists and then engage in that activity, which further facilitates the power structure's ability to demonize leftists, because these people are going, yeah, I'm a leftist. And they don't properly understand the leftist project. Keep in mind, the only person that I know of to date that was arrested for the burning of the police station in Minneapolis at the beginning of the uprisings in the wake of the murder of George Floyd was a boogaloo, a far-right militia organizing boogaloo boy who did it in order to kick off massive violence that would either threaten or cause people to question the very foundational fabrics of Western society, and it would kick off a second fucking civil war. There's a long history of this. And we on the left have to be acutely aware that they are still looking at us in the same way and are set about the purpose of subverting what we are trying to do in 2020, now 2021, in the same way. They will have to use now 2021 language, and they'll respond to trends that grow in 2021 so that they can properly manipulate them and cause us to be terrified and in perpetual fear in such a way that we either rely on demagoguing scumbag racists like Donald Trump, or middle-of-the-road, rhetorically long-time racist, mass-incarcerating fucking pieces of shit like Joe Biden. Either way, we're relying on some top-down power structure to protect us from this collapse of society, from all that we fear and all we've been trained to be terrified of. Right now, there's this whole bullshit controversy going on around hashtag force the vote, which either way that you fall on that debate, the only thing that's required, the only thing that it's pushing for is a reliance on top-down structural mechanisms to do the work for us, to create the conditions of our emancipation for us. Meanwhile, you have some people who are saying, hey, if you don't buy into our version of full support of bourgeois mechanisms, then you're the subversion. You're the mechanisms of imperialism. It's the same exact propagandist methodology sort of turned on its head, right? Today you have gray zone misinformations and agents of division out here trying to tell you that anyone that doesn't properly beg for scraps from the mechanisms of power is an imperialist. Well, during the height of Operation Gladio, they would have been saying, oh, well, you're just a communist that wants to dismantle the very fabric of society. You're actually out here trying to destroy, the freedoms of people. Today, it's, you're actually out here trying to destroy Medicare if you don't support this full-throated support of Congress taking action and we doing nothing but wait for Congress to take that action. Demanding others take action for us. Instead of empowering each individual to free themselves, to emancipate themselves. Like Malatesta said, we anarchists don't want to emancipate the people, we want the people to emancipate themselves. We want people, and I think communists are in agreement with that, modern communists and anarchists are essentially in agreement that we want people to understand the nature of their oppression so that they'll join us in rising up against those who oppress us in order to truly teach people to emancipate themselves. We may have disagreements on how to go about that. We may or may not. I think we don't historically. But that's, you can go look into my video, Propaganda by the Deed and Anarchy, for a further elaboration on that theory. But this type of fascist infiltration of leftist organizing has a long history. It's heavily supported and funded by all the Western powers, and it definitely continues to today. Yes, Operation Gladio is not currently in operation, but some far more elaborate version of it is. I mean, when we look at what the NSA is now, when we look at, post-Patriot Act, well, you have to know that that's a direct extension of the COINTELPRO history that was used, the mechanisms of COINTELPRO that was used to totally smash the organizing ability of the Panthers, and they even murdered Black Panthers in the effort. Infiltrated the Black Panthers and turned Panthers one against another. Created instability and fear and distrust in fellow leftists. That on the heels of our secret services working in direct coordination and in many cases providing a lot of the major funding for Operation Gladio. Wow, fam. Be on the lookout. They're constantly coming for us. You're not paranoid. They really want to destroy us. And the fact that they want to destroy us is because what we offer is freedom for about a little more than 7 billion people, and the end of a small handful, maybe 1 to 3 million people's ability to laud power and brutally oppress those other 7 billion. Now look, yes, that was an overview, and we really went into depth about the different three and covered a lot of the different 3 episodes in that series, but I really, really suggest you go watch all 3 episodes. There's a lot of meat in those episodes that we didn't even touch on at all in this introduction to it. But I just thought it would be useful to kind of try to relate it to some more modern contemporary issues that we're seeing unfolding around us today, put it in historic context with what happened with, the real first reactionary elements that in the FBI and the CIA that were employed to subvert the anti-war movement and the civil rights movement, and then later the Black Power movement with the Black Panthers and, Malcolm X, the murder of Malcolm X, all this stuff. These are not activities and manifestations that pop up in vacuums out of nowhere. This is an unbroken project. This is a long-term mechanism of our oppression that uses our fear and terror as one of its primary organizing tools. Knowing this, I think we may become more adept at spotting bad actors in our circles today. Because they're out there, fam. They're out there. There is no way they are not trying to infiltrate anti-fascist groups organizing, communist groups organizing, Black Lives Matter groups organizing, prison solidarity networks, food not bombs groups. And I'm not saying that to make you afraid. You don't have to be afraid. If you learn this history of their tactics and their methodology, gives us a greater shield against it. And just remember, if you're organizing with someone and you don't recognize in them a deep, deep sense of compassion and empathy, I don't know, there might be good cause to question their motives. And also, if you have anyone in your midst who's constantly advocating for more romantic, exciting activities, right? Well, we need to be cautious of that type of zeal. Now, people who are new to leftist organizing have that zeal, and we need to be able to tell the difference between an honest, earnest, sort of fresh comrade to the movement who is a little less learned, and we can take them under our wing and we can help them focus that passion. But we have to be able to tell the difference between that and someone who's trying to come in and push subversive. Why don't we just go there and fuck them up? Why don't we just kidnap them? Right? Why don't we just go and loot the place? That's very different. And we need to be cautious of it. And I think that understanding this history, understanding the history of Operation Gladio, understanding the histories of COINTELPRO, makes us more adept and more intelligent leftists today. All right, fam. I think I've said enough. Much love to you. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for watching. Please make sure you go watch the whole series. It's really, really incredible. So, all right, fam. We'll see you next time on Punks for Progress.
That I